It was exactly 11:58 p.m. when I heard the knock. A single sharp rap on the door. I was alone in the house, just me, a cup of coffee, and my laptop flickering in the dark. The knock was so precise, so deliberate, it sent a shiver down my spine. But what really chilled me was the time. I live in a small town, the kind of place where no one knocks on your door unannounced, especially not at midnight, not unless there's something wrong. Without thinking, I looked at my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Who could be here at this hour? I hesitated for a moment. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashing through my mind. I wanted to ignore it, pretend it never happened, but the knock came again, this time louder. Now, before I take you further into this story, I need to ask you something. Have you ever had someone knock on your door late at night? Someone you weren't expecting? Tell me in the comments below if you've experienced anything like this, or where you're watching from right now. Because trust me, what happens next, you won't believe. Pause for interaction. I got up from my chair slowly, my heart pounding harder with every step I took toward the front door. I couldn't see anyone through the peephole, just darkness. I was about to turn back when I heard a voice, muffled, almost like it was coming from far away, but unmistakably real. "Please, help me." It was faint, weak, but it was there. I froze. Was this some kind of sick joke? Who would be playing games at this hour? My mind raced. Maybe it was someone in trouble, or worse, someone pretending to be. I should have called the police, but for some reason, I didn't. Something about the voice drew me in. I opened the door, just a crack, enough to peek through. Nothing, just the empty street, silent except for the wind rustling through the trees. No sign of anyone. I stepped outside, looking around, calling out. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. That's when I noticed something. The air had changed. It was cold, unnaturally cold. My breath came out in small clouds, even though it had been a warm evening just minutes ago. I stepped back inside, closing the door quickly, locking it tight behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I didn't sleep much after that. Every sound in the house seemed louder. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. But nothing else happened that night. The next day, I convinced myself it was just some random prank. Or maybe I had imagined it until the next night. This time, the knock came at exactly midnight. Sharp, insistent. I didn't hesitate. I rushed to the door, looked through the peephole, and there he was, a man, standing in the shadows, his face hidden by the brim of a wide, dark hat. I could barely make out his features, but there was something wrong about him. His posture was stiff, unnatural, like he wasn't standing but being held up by something unseen. His head tilted slightly toward the door, like he was listening for movement inside. My heart raced. I didn't know what to do. Should I open the door? Call the police? But then he spoke again. "Help me." The same voice as the night before, weak and distant. But now that I could see him, I knew there was no way this man needed help. His very presence filled me with dread. I stepped back, away from the door, hoping he would leave. But the knocking continued. For the next week, the midnight visitor returned. Every night, the same knock, the same plea for help. I didn't open the door again after that second night. I couldn't. Something told me if I did, I wouldn't survive. But I couldn't ignore him either. I tried everything, leaving lights on, staying up all night, even sleeping at a friend's house. But no matter where I was or what I did, the knock came. Always at midnight, always the same man, the same voice. I told a few people about it, but they just laughed it off. "It's probably just some prankster," they said. "Maybe someone's trying to scare you for fun." But I knew better. There was something evil about him, something that felt wrong. I could feel it in my bones. Then one night, something changed. The knock came as usual, but this time, it didn't stop. The banging grew louder and louder, until it felt like the door was going to break down. I could hear the voice not just outside Namfao, but inside my head, echoing. "Help me. Let me in. Please." It was overwhelming. I couldn't think, couldn't move. I felt frozen, paralyzed by fear. My phone was right there, but I couldn't reach for it. My body wouldn't obey me. That's when I started digging. I needed to know who or what this man was. I spent hours researching local legends, old police reports, anything I could find, and what I discovered shook me to my core. Years ago, there was a man who lived on the outskirts of town, a reclusive man known for keeping to himself. One night, he disappeared. Neighbors said they heard strange noises coming from his house, knocking, shouting, but when they checked, no one was there. The man was never found, and over time, his story became a ghostly legend. People claimed that his spirit roamed the town, knocking on doors, looking for someone to help him cross over. But those who opened the door to him were never seen again. The next time the knock came, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't run from it anymore. But I wasn't about to open that door. I needed to confront him, but on my terms. I set up cameras around the house, motion sensors, everything I could think of to capture proof of his existence. If this was a spirit, a ghost, or something worse, I needed evidence. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. At this point, I'd love to know. What would you do if someone knocked on your door at midnight? Would you answer? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like the video if you're still here with me. The next night, everything was ready. The cameras were rolling, motion sensors set up around the house. I sat in the dark, staring at the monitor, waiting for the midnight visitor. The clock ticked closer to 12 o'clock, and my hands trembled with anticipation. I knew this night would be different. Exactly at midnight, the sound came again. But this time it wasn't from the door. It was inside the house. "Can you hear me?" The voice. The same faint, eerie voice I'd been hearing for the past week. But now, it was inside. I froze, staring at the monitor. The cameras showed nothing. No movement, no shadows. But I could feel it. Something was in the room with me. My heart raced as I slowly turned my head, scanning the dark corners of the room. The temperature dropped again, my breath visible in the cold air. "Let me in." It was closer now, right behind me. I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing, just the empty room. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could feel something, a presence. It was as if the very air around me had come alive, pressing down on me. I bolted out of the room, running to the front door. I wasn't thinking clearly. All I knew was that I had to get out. I grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. No matter how hard I pulled, it was stuck, like something was holding it shut. Panic set in as the voice grew louder. "You can't escape!" The voice was all around me now, filling the house, echoing through the walls. I tried to call for help, but my phone was dead. No signal, no way to contact anyone. It was just me, and whatever was inside the house. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen in front of the door. It felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably only minutes. Eventually, the voice faded, The cold lifted, and I was left standing there, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. The house was quiet again, but I knew the visitor wasn't gone. The next day, I made a decision. I needed to find out what was happening. I couldn't keep running or hiding. I had to confront this head-on. So I went to the one place in town that no one liked to talk about, the old records office. If this was connected to that missing man from years ago, maybe there was something in the town's history that could help me. The clerk at the records office was an old woman, probably in her 70s. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost when I asked about the man who disappeared. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, eyes wide, before finally muttering under her breath. "You shouldn't be asking about him," I insisted. I needed to know. She hesitated, then pulled out an old file, dusty, yellowed with age. As she handed it to me, her hands shook. "He wasn't the only one, you know." That sentence sent a chill through me. She explained that over the past few decades, people had gone missing, always the same way. A knock at midnight, a man asking for help, and those who opened the door were never seen again. I spent the entire afternoon going through the files. The stories were the same. Different families, different houses, but always the same pattern. It went back almost 100 years. The legend said that the visitor was once a man who had been wronged, murdered, but his soul never found peace. He was cursed to wander, knocking on doors, searching for someone to help him. But there was a catch. If you opened the door, you'd join him in his eternal torment. I didn't want to believe it. It sounded like some ghost story to scare kids. But after everything I'd seen, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. That night I decided to stay awake again. But this time I had a plan. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to confront him. Midnight came, and just like clockwork, the knock echoed through the house. Knock. Knock. I stood at the door, heart racing, my hand hovering over the handle. But I didn't open it. I begged her to explain, to tell me everything she knew. She hesitated, but then, with a heavy sigh, she told me the story. Daniel Warden had been an ordinary man until he was wronged. No one knew exactly what had happened, but something drove him mad. He became obsessed with revenge, with making people suffer the way he had. When he died, his spirit never found peace. Instead, it was said that he struck a deal with something dark, something beyond this world. And now, he wanders, searching for the one who will finally break his curse. But no one ever does, the clerk whispered. They all open the door, and then they disappear. I asked her what would happen if I didn't open the door. "He'll keep coming, night after night, until you give in. And when you do, it's over." I left the records office feeling more lost than ever. Was this really happening? Was I being haunted by the ghost of a man who had made a pact with something evil? It sounded insane, but after everything I'd experienced, I couldn't deny it anymore. That night, I didn't wait for the knock. I left the house, driving out of town to a small motel. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could escape it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that easy. At midnight, in the cramped, dimly lit room of the motel, the knock came again. Knock, knock. I froze, staring at the door. I wasn't home. How had he followed me? My pulse quickened as the knocking grew louder, more insistent. Knock, knock. The voice followed. "You can't hide from me. Open the door." I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. It didn't matter where I went. He would always find me. I realized then that there was no escape. The next night I returned to the house. I had no choice. If Daniel Warden wanted me, then I had to confront him. But I wouldn't make it easy for him. I had a plan. I'd set up traps, cameras, anything to capture what was happening. As midnight approached, the house felt alive again, the air thick with anticipation. And right on time, the knock came. Knock, knock. I stood in front of the door, heart pounding. But this time, I was ready. I wasn't going to let him win. I had to know the truth. I had to find out what he wanted. Slowly, I reached for the door, my hand trembling as I gripped the handle. "Tell me who you are," I demanded through the door. There was silence. Then finally, the voice spoke. "I am Daniel Warden, and I need you to finish what I started." For days, I couldn't sleep. Daniel Warden's voice echoed in my head, every word like a whispered promise of terror. I didn't know what he meant by finish what I started, but the weight of his words hung over me like a dark cloud. Every night, I expected the knock. Every night I waited, my heart racing, listening to the silence, knowing it would be broken soon. And yet part of me was curious. What was Daniel Warden's unfinished business? Could it really be that simple? Could I, somehow, end it all? The knocking resumed the following night, as regular as clockwork. Knock, knock. This time it wasn't aggressive. It was soft, almost pleading, like he was begging me to let him in. "Please," the voice said, "I need you. Only you can do this." I stood on the other side of the door, my hand hovering over the knob. I could feel the coldness radiating from it, as though just touching it would freeze my soul. But curiosity gnawed at me. I needed answers. I couldn't live like this forever, trapped between fear and uncertainty. "Tell me what you want," I demanded again. There was a long pause before Daniel responded. "There's something I need you to find, something buried in the ground where it all began. If you don't, this will never end." That was all he gave me. No more cryptic warnings, no more knocking that night. Just a chilling instruction. Something was buried. I was supposed to find it. But where? And what was it? I spent hours scouring the records, looking for any clue as to where Daniel Warden's unfinished business might lie. His old property was long gone, replaced by modern buildings. But then, buried in one of the older accounts, I found a mention of an abandoned church, miles outside of town, a place where Daniel Warden had been seen just days before his disappearance. Could this be it? Could this be the place where everything had begun? The next day, I gathered what little courage I had left and drove out to the site. The road was long and winding, lined with tall, gnarled trees that seemed to close in the further I went. By the time I reached the church, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the crumbling structure. The air felt heavy, as though the place itself was drenched in misery and sorrow. The church was in ruins. The roof had caved in, and the walls were covered in vines and moss. With nothing but a shovel and my growing sense of dread, I began to dig near what used to be the church's cemetery. The ground was hard, but I couldn't stop. My arms ached. My back screamed in protest, but something drove me forward. Every shovel full of dirt felt like I was unearthing more than just soil. It felt like I was digging up secrets, forgotten, buried deep for a reason. After what felt like hours, the shovel hit something hard. A hollow sound echoed through the earth and my heart skipped a beat. I dropped to my knees, brushing the dirt away with my hands, revealing an old rotting wooden box. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. Whatever it was, I had found it. With shaking hands, I pried the box open. Inside, wrapped in a faded moth-eaten cloth, was a small silver locket. I picked it up, the metal cold against my skin. It looked ordinary, but the moment I touched it, I felt an overwhelming sense of despair, as if all of Daniel Warden's pain and rage had been trapped inside. Suddenly, the air around me grew colder, the shadows lengthened, and I heard a voice. "You found it. Now you know the truth." I turned, and there, standing just a few feet away, was Daniel Warden. He looked exactly like the old photos I had seen. Tall, gaunt, his eyes hollow, as if the light had been sucked out of them long ago. His presence was cold, unnerving, like standing too close to the edge of an abyss. "This locket?" I said, holding it up. "What is it?" Daniel's eyes flickered to the locket, his expression unreadable. Then, with a voice filled with centuries of grief, he whispered, "It was hers, the one I lost, the one they took from me." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Who? Who took her? The ones who betrayed me, the ones who made me what I am now. This is my curse, because I couldn't save her. For the first time, I saw something in Daniel that wasn't terrifying. There was pain, deep and raw beneath the horror. He had been wronged, and in his quest for revenge, he'd become something twisted, something monstrous. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. His gaze met mine, dark and haunted. "You have to destroy the locket. Only then will I be free. Only then will it end." Destroy the locket. It seemed simple enough, but I knew nothing was ever that easy. What if he was lying? What if destroying it unleashed something even worse? But as I stood there, staring into the eyes of a man who had been trapped in his own torment for centuries, I realized I had no choice. But before I could act, I want to ask you something. What would you do? Would you destroy the locket, risk everything to free a tormented soul? Or would you keep it, hold on to it, just in case there's more to the story? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the scariest decisions are the ones that seem the simplest. As the silence settled between us, I felt the weight of Daniel Warden's plea hanging in the air. My fingers tightened around the locket, its cold metal seeming to pulse with an energy of its own. There was something unsettling about it, something ancient and malevolent. But at the same time, it was filled with sadness. I could feel the pain in it, the loss that Daniel had spoken of. Destroy it? It sounded simple. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than Daniel was telling me. What if destroying this locket isn't the end? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's form flickered in the dim light, as if he was struggling to remain visible. "It will end for me," he said, his voice almost pleading. "It's the only way to break my curse. Please, you have to trust me." But how could I trust him? How could I trust anything that had come from this nightmare? Before I could make my decision, something strange happened. The world around me seemed to shift, blur, and then suddenly I wasn't standing in the ruins of the old church anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere from the past. It was the same church, but it was no longer in ruins. The walls were whole, the roof intact, and the air inside was warm with the flicker of candlelight. And there, in the center of the church, I saw her, a woman, young, beautiful, with dark hair and sad eyes. She was holding the locket, her fingers tracing the silver chain, as if it held all the memories of her life. But there was something else in her expression, fear. And standing behind her, hidden in the shadows, was Daniel Warden. He wasn't a ghost then, he was alive, but there was something dark in his eyes, something dangerous. "You promised," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You said you would protect me." "I did," Daniel replied, stepping closer to her. "But they took you from me. They forced my hand." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "This is not what I wanted, Daniel. Not like this." Suddenly, the church doors burst open, and several men entered, their faces twisted with anger. They carried weapons, axes, torches, and a sense of righteous fury. "Burn the witch!" one of them shouted, and in that moment, I understood. This woman, she had been accused of witchcraft, and Daniel, in his desperation to save her, had done something unforgivable, something that had cursed them both. The vision faded, and I was back in the present, standing in the cold, broken remains of the church, holding the very locket she had once clutched so tightly. My heart raced. I now knew the truth. Daniel hadn't been completely honest. He wasn't just a victim of betrayal. He had played a part in something much darker. "You lied to me," I said, my voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "She wasn't taken from you. You betrayed her. You did something wrong, and now you want me to clean up your mess." Daniel's figure flickered again, but this time I saw something different in his eyes. Guilt. For a moment he looked less like the terrifying specter that had haunted me for days, and more like a broken man. "I tried to save her," he said, his voice cracking. "But I was too late. I made a deal. Something dark. I didn't know what it would cost." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about love or loss. Daniel had made a pact with something far more sinister, something that had cursed him, trapped him in this limbo. And now, he was trying to pass that burden on to me. "If I destroy the locket," I said slowly, "what happens to you?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know." The weight of his words pressed down on me. He didn't know. He didn't know if destroying the locket would free him, or if it would condemn him to something worse. But the fear in his voice told me that he wasn't sure he wanted to find out. I looked down at the locket in my hand, its silver surface gleaming in the pale light of the moon. Could I really do this? Could I really be the one to make this decision? Before I could decide, a strange noise echoed through the church, a low, guttural growl that sent chills racing down my spine. I turned, my heart pounding, and saw something moving in the shadows, something that wasn't Daniel. "They're coming," Daniel said, his voice suddenly urgent. "The ones I made the deal with. They want the locket." Panic surged through me. I had to make a choice, now. So what would you do if you were in my place? Destroy the locket and risk unleashing whatever horror Daniel Warden had made a pact with? Or hold on to it and possibly keep the darkness at bay, but live with the knowledge that Daniel's suffering would never end? Let me know in the comments, and while you're thinking about it, don't forget to hit that like button if this story has you on the edge of your seat. Believe me, it's only going to get darker from here. The growl grew louder, the shadows in the ruined church shifting as if alive. I could feel it, the presence of something ancient and malevolent, something that was coming for me, for the locket. My pulse quickened, my breath ragged, as I looked between Daniel and the approaching darkness. "You have to decide," Daniel urged, his voice desperate now. "There's no time." The weight of the locket in my hand felt heavier, almost burning against my skin. I knew there was no escaping this. Whatever came next would depend on the choice I made in the next few moments. But how could I trust anything anymore? Daniel had lied to me, hidden the truth about his past, about the dark deal he had made. Could I really risk my life, maybe even my soul, for someone who had already doomed himself? And yet, His suffering was undeniable. Even if he had caused it himself, the torment he had endured was something no one deserved. My mind raced, and then, as if guided by instinct, I made my choice. With a trembling hand, I raised the locket high, feeling its dark energy pulse through me one last time. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was apologizing to Daniel, to the woman he had loved, or to myself. And with that, I brought the locket down on the cold stone floor, smashing it with all the strength I could muster. The sound was deafening, a sharp, metallic crack that echoed through the ruins, followed by a blinding light that seemed to explode from the locket. I stumbled backward, covering my eyes, as the very air around me seemed to warp and twist. The growls from the shadows became shrieks of agony, as if the darkness itself was being torn apart. When the light finally faded, I opened my eyes to find the church eerily silent. The shadows were gone. The malevolent presence vanished, and standing in front of me, where Daniel had been, was nothing but a pile of ashes. It was over, or so I thought. As I stood there, catching my breath, a sudden chill washed over me. I looked down at the spot where Daniel had disappeared, and to my horror, the ashes began to shift. Slowly they swirled into the air, forming shapes, words, etched into the stone floor. "The deal is yours now." My heart stopped. What? No, this couldn't be happening. Before I could fully process it, a voice whispered in my ear, low and sinister. "The darkness never leaves. It only changes hands." I felt it then, a cold weight settling into my chest, as if something had wrapped itself around my soul. The locket was gone, but the curse, the darkness that had followed Daniel for centuries, was now mine. I had broken his chains, but in doing so I had shackled myself to the same fate. It's been weeks since that night in the church, and every day I can feel the darkness growing stronger inside me. At first it was subtle, a cold shiver down my spine, shadows flickering at the edge of my vision. But now, it's something I can't escape. It follows me, whispers to me, draws me deeper into its depths. I've tried everything to rid myself of it, burning the clothes I wore that night, abandoning the town, even seeing a priest. But nothing works. The curse is bound to me now, just as it was to Daniel, and I know there's only one way out. I have to make a deal, and I will, soon. But for now, I'm waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right person. Because just like Daniel, I need someone else to take my place. So here's my question to you. What would you do if the darkness came